In every civilization humanity has ever built, across every culture and every era of our long and violent history, one figure has always been sacred: the healer. We are conditioned from birth to look at the medicae symbol and feel something specific, a deep, instinctive sense of safety. The belief that somewhere in the chaos there's a pair of hands whose sole purpose is to push back against the darkness, to hold the line between the living and the dead on behalf of whoever ends up on that operating table. We revere healers because they represent something we desperately need to believe exists in a universe that seems determined to destroy us. The idea that some hands are dedicated entirely to mercy. But the 41st millennium is not a universe that rewards that belief. What happens to a healer who is placed inside a machine specifically designed to produce suffering on an industrial scale? What happens to the human mind when the act of saving a life stops being a miracle and becomes a miserable mechanical quota that resets every single morning with the next wave of broken bodies? Today, we are going to find out. We are going to step inside the triage tent, and we are going to follow the slow, suffocating psychological death of the Astra Militarum medicae, a soul that witnessed so much suffering that the mercy inside them didn't break. It rotted. To understand what happens to a combat medicae, you first need to sit with the fundamental contradiction at the heart of their existence, because it is a contradiction so complete, so total, that it is almost absurd when you state it plainly. They are people trained in the delicate, precise arts of preservation and healing. They have spent years learning the architecture of the human body, where it is strong, where it is fragile, how to intervene when the machinery of life begins to fail. They have been educated in compassion as a professional discipline, and then the Imperium takes everything they have learned, everything they are, and deploys them into the single environment most perfectly designed to make all of it feel completely, cosmically pointless. An Imperial war zone does not produce casualties, it produces an ocean of them, and a medicae is handed a cup and told to start emptying. When a novice medicae arrives at the front lines for the first time, they still have their humanity intact. That matters. Remember it because it will not last long. They arrive with genuine empathy, genuine horror, genuine sorrow. When the first shattered guardsman is dragged into their tent, screaming, terrified, calling for a mother who is light years away and will never know what happened to her child, the young medic feels it, all of it, the full weight of what they are looking at. They weep as they work. They hold the hands of the dying, they pray, they believe in the very core of themselves that every single life in front of them is sacred and worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. That belief is the first thing the war takes, because the casualties do not slow down to allow grief. They do not arrive in manageable numbers that give the medic time to process what they are seeing and recover before the next one arrives. They come in waves, unending, suffocating, relentless waves that do not care about the psychological state of the person trying to hold them back. The triage tent transforms almost immediately from a place of healing into something that looks far more like a slaughterhouse that has been given a thin coat of medicae white paint over the top of the blood. And in this environment, the Hippocratic ideal, the foundational philosophy that every life has intrinsic value and deserves every available effort, becomes not just impractical, but actively dangerous. The medic cannot afford to give everything to every patient, because giving everything to one patient means giving nothing to the 20 behind them. The Imperium does not give them the luxury of that kind of compassion. It gives them a triage protocol, a set of colored tags, and a brutal mathematical framework for deciding who lives and who gets left on the ground to finish dying on their own. They are forced, in other words, to play God every single day, with limited supplies, no sleep, and an ocean of suffering that never gets smaller no matter how fast they work. The human brain is genuinely resilient. It can survive extraordinary amounts of stress and trauma, but it was not built for this. It was not designed to absorb an infinite, continuous stream of empathetic grief without finding some way to protect itself from the weight of it. And so, after enough time in the triage tent, the mind of the medicae executes a defense mechanism that is as understandable as it is tragic. It starts severing the connections. Not all at once. It is not a dramatic breakdown or a single moment of collapse. It is gradual, quiet, almost imperceptible from the inside. The neurological pathways that govern compassion begin to dull. The empathy that once fired immediately at the sight of suffering starts to require more stimulus to activate, and then more, until one day the medic realizes that the screaming from the next bed over is registering in their mind the same way the hum of a generator does, as background noise, present but not felt, not connected to anything. This is where the cognitive shift begins, that changes everything about how the medicae sees the people in front of them. The patient stops being a person, the shattered guardsman on the table, the one who had a name, a home, a specific laugh that his squad mates will miss, stops being visible as any of those things. What the medic sees instead is a biological problem that requires a mechanical solution. A torn artery is a leaking pipe. A shattered rib cage is damaged structural plating. A traumatic amputation is a chassis breach that needs to be sealed before the unit can be returned to operational status. The language changes inside their head, and the language change matters because language shapes perception. And once you start seeing a dying human being as a repair job, you have crossed a threshold that is very difficult to come back from. This is the rot of mercy. Not a dramatic evil, not a conscious choice to stop caring, not a villain's transformation. Just a slow, grinding, entirely understandable decomposition of the compassionate drive under the weight of more suffering than any human mind was built to carry. The veteran medicae, who has been in the tent for years, is not malicious. They are not cruel in any simple sense. They have simply become hollow. The part of them that once saved lives out of love, out of a genuine, burning desire to protect the sacred human soul in front of them, is gone. What remains is a shell of protocol and procedure, patching up the meat with the same deadened efficiency that a servitor brings to any repetitive industrial task. They stitch, they amputate, they tag, and somewhere deep inside the machinery of their mind, in a room that has been sealed shut and left dark for years, the person they used to be sits quietly, waiting for a rescue that will never come. Mercy is dead, the healer remains, and those two things are not the same. If the first stage of the rot is the death of empathy, the second stage is something more specific and more devastating. The birth of a logic system designed to replace it. Because the medicae cannot function in a complete emotional void. The decisions they make are too consequential, too immediate, too relentlessly demanding to be made from pure numbness alone. The mind needs a framework. It needs a set of rules that can be applied quickly, consistently, and without hesitation, that will tell the medic what to do in the fraction of a second they have to decide who gets the last coagulant patch and who gets left to bleed. The Adeptus Medicae provides that framework. It is called triage protocol, and it is, at its core, one of the most morally violent things the Imperium has ever institutionalized. The system is brutally simple. You assess the wounded, and you sort them into categories. Those who can be quickly stabilized and returned to the line get the resources. Those who require too much time or too many supplies to save are marked and bypassed. Those who are beyond any realistic intervention are left to die as efficiently as possible, which sometimes means quickly and sometimes means slowly and alone on the ground outside the tent. The medicae is handed this system and told that it is not cruelty. It is mathematics. It is the rational allocation of limited resources for maximum tactical return. It is, in the language of imperial logistics, the correct approach. And they are right, in a purely mechanical sense. The math checks out, spending 2 hours and the last of your morphia trying to save a soldier with a shredded abdomen, and no realistic chance of surviving to see the next morning, genuinely does cost the lives of 4 soldiers with survivable wounds who died waiting. The utilitarian calculus is not wrong. But the utilitarian calculus requires you to look at the boy with the shredded abdomen, the one calling for his mother, the one who was alive and terrified and completely aware of what was happening to him, and make the active, conscious choice to walk past him and let him finish dying. Not because you do not care, initially at least, because you care so much that you understand why you cannot afford to. That distinction, caring so much that you choose to let someone die, is not one that the human mind can hold cleanly. It requires the construction of a psychological fortress built entirely of cold logic, and maintaining that fortress against the constant assault of the reality outside it is exhausting in a way that goes deeper than fatigue. The darkest application of this triage logic is what the regiment calls the Emperor's Peace, and what the medicae learns over time to think of as something else entirely. In a galaxy where the enemy fields weaponry specifically designed to inflict biological corruption that no field medicae has the tools or the knowledge to reverse, there are wounds that cannot be treated. There are conditions that the medic can identify immediately as incompatible with anything resembling survival or quality of life. Tyrannid biotoxins that dissolve the nervous system from the inside. Chaos mutations that spread through flesh like fire through dry grass. Radiation exposure that has already turned the organs into something unrecognizable. In these cases, the medical intervention available in a field tent is not healing. It is delay. It is prolonging a process that is already inevitable, buying hours of agony instead of offering any meaningful outcome. In these cases, imperial doctrine is unambiguous. The medic puts down the scalpel and picks up the last pistol. A point-blank shot is more merciful than what comes next without it. This is the Emperor's Peace, the formal, sanctioned, medically prescribed act of killing the patient you cannot save. The first time a medicae delivers the Emperor's Peace, it breaks something inside them that never fully heals. They weep. They cannot sleep. They replay the moment obsessively, examining every detail, asking whether there was truly no alternative, whether they made the right call, whether the patient deserved more time. The weight of it is enormous, and it lands all at once, and there is no way to be prepared for it. By the 100th time, the weight is gone. Not processed, not resolved, gone. The trigger pull has been repeated often enough that the neural pathway associated with it has been smoothed flat by repetition. It has become routine in the most profound and horrifying sense of that word. The recoil is familiar, the sound is familiar, the result is familiar. The medic has not made peace with what they are doing. They have simply stopped experiencing it as something that requires peace to be made. And somewhere in the space between the 100th and the 200th execution, a thought surfaces in the medic's mind that they will never speak aloud to anyone. A thought that arrives not as a horror, but as a quiet, exhausted observation. The thought that delivering the Emperor's Peace is faster, cleaner, more honest in a way than the alternative, that the soldier who receives a quick, clean death in the tent is spared everything that comes after. The brutal recovery, the return to the line, the statistical near certainty of ending up back on this same table with worse wounds in 6 months. That the death they are delivering, in this specific context, in this specific galaxy, might be the closest thing to genuine mercy that they have left to offer. When a healer starts to believe that, the rot has reached the root. Step inside the triage tent, and the first thing that hits you is not the sight, it is the smell. Blood has a smell that is impossible to describe accurately to someone who has not encountered it in volume. Metallic and heavy and somehow organic in a way that bypasses the rational mind and activates something much older. Mix that with bleach, with the sharp chemical edge of fear sweat, with rotting tissue that has been sitting too long in warm air, with the specific foulness of a body that is in the process of shutting down. The tent holds all of it simultaneously, permanently. The smell does not leave. It saturates the canvas, the clothing, the hair and skin of everyone who works inside. The veteran medicae carries it everywhere they go. It has become part of them. The floor is permanently slick. The surfaces are stained in the specific oxidized brown of blood that has dried and been partially cleaned and dried again too many times to ever fully come out. The light is harsh and functional and designed to illuminate wound geometry rather than to make anyone feel comfortable. There is nothing in the tent that is there for any reason other than brutal, grinding utility. This is where the medicae lives. This is their world. The soldiers of the regiment do not look at the veteran medicae the way they look at a savior. They fear them. It is not a simple or entirely rational fear. The guardsman knows, on a logical level, that the medic is there to help them. But the body does not always listen to the logical level, and the body knows what a visit to the triage tent actually means in practice. It means dull bone sores used without adequate anesthetic because the anesthetic ran out 3 days ago. It means cauterization performed fast and functional rather than gently. It means procedures whose goal is to return you to combat effectiveness as quickly as possible, not to minimize your suffering, because your suffering is not the variable the medic is optimizing for anymore. The healer has become, in the collective mythology of the regiment, something closer to a butcher, a necessary one, a butcher whose work keeps you alive, but a butcher nonetheless. The white apron has stopped reading as mercy and started reading as the uniform of someone who will hurt you in ways that are technically for your own good, and who will do it without flinching, and who will move on to the next patient before you have finished processing what just happened to your body. This fearful perception creates an isolation around the veteran medicae that is total and self-reinforcing. In the mess hall, people shift slightly when the medic sits down. Not dramatically, nobody is rude about it, not openly, but there is a perimeter that forms, a subtle gravitational repulsion that keeps the tables around the veteran healer a little emptier than the others. Nobody wants to make sustained eye contact with the person whose job it is to decide, in a fraction of a second, whether you are worth the last coagulant patch. Nobody wants to share a drink with the hands that sawed off their squadmate's leg yesterday, with the same expression they would use to repair a faulty piece of equipment. The medic is completely alone in the middle of a regiment of thousands, and the cruel irony of this isolation is that it is produced entirely by the work they do to protect those same thousands, as if the act of witnessing the worst of what happens to a human body in war creates a glass wall between the witness and everyone who has not seen it, and the glass is too thick to break through from either side. In the rare quiet moments, when the bombardment has briefly stopped and the tide of casualties has temporarily receded and the tent is as close to empty as it ever gets, the ghosts arrive. Not literally. The veteran medicae is far too stripped of anything resembling mysticism to experience it that way. What arrives is the archive. The accumulated weight of every patient who did not make it, every face that passed through the tent and did not leave it alive, every decision that ended one life to preserve another, thousands of them compressed into a silence that is louder than the artillery. But here is the detail that matters, and it is the detail that reveals how far the rot has actually progressed. The veteran medic cannot remember the faces. individually, specifically as people, they are gone. The volume of the dead has exceeded the brain's capacity to store them as individuals, and so they have merged into something undifferentiated. A single, composite mask of suffering that represents all of them and none of them simultaneously. The medic cannot mourn because the grief has no specific place to attach to. The dead have become a category rather than a collection of people. And a category cannot be grieved. It can only be noted and filed and left in the dark. The final realization that arrives in these quiet moments, the one that seals the psychological transformation completely, is the recognition of complicity. The medicae looks at everything they have done and understands with cold and total clarity that they are not fighting against the machine. They are a component of it. Every soldier they patch back together is not being saved, they are being reloaded. Return to the chamber of the Emperor's gun, ready to be fired again at the same enemy, in the same war, for the same grinding, endless outcome in different reasons. The medic's skill and labor and sacrifice do not reduce the suffering in the tent. They ensure that the suffering gets to repeat itself with the same people until something finally breaks that cannot be fixed, even by the most efficient butcher in white. The boulder goes back up the mountain, the boulder comes back down, the medic picks it up again. This is the Sisyphean truth of the combat medicae's existence, and once it has been seen clearly, it cannot be unseen. The Imperium is built architecturally and ideologically on the image of the perfect human form. Walk through any imperial city of sufficient size and you will find statues, enormous towering depictions of flawless martial humanity, broad-shouldered heroes with chiseled features and spotless armor, striking down grotesque enemies with expressions of absolute righteous certainty. The propaganda of the ecclesiarchy presents the human body as something that the emperor himself shaped with intention, a vessel forged for purpose, durable and meaningful and sacred in its construction. The combat medicae knows what those statues are made of. Marble, not flesh. Because flesh, in the reality of an imperial war zone, bears absolutely no resemblance to those statues. Flesh is fragile in ways that the propaganda actively works to conceal from the people inside it. Flesh tears. Flesh rots. Flesh dissolves under bioacid and burns under lasfire and comes apart under ballistic impact with a speed and completeness that is genuinely shocking even after you have seen it hundreds of times. A single orc macro stubber round, casually fired, barely aimed, a throwaway expenditure of ammunition for the creature pulling the trigger, can take a decade of training, a lifetime of experience, a complete and irreplaceable human being, and convert all of it into red paste in a fraction of a second. The medicae sees this every day. They see how thin the margin actually is between the person and the absence of the person. They develop an intimacy with human fragility that no statue, no sermon, and no piece of imperial propaganda was designed to acknowledge. This intimacy breeds something that starts as disillusionment and eventually hardens into something closer to contempt, not for the soldiers themselves, but for the lie, for the gap between what the Imperium says the human body is and what the human body actually is when you have your hands inside it. Why fight so hard to preserve something this fragile? The question is not asked with cruelty, it arrives as genuine exhaustion. The medic is engaged in a daily battle against the biological limits of a chassis that was simply not engineered for the environment it has been placed in. The human body was not built for the 41st millennium. It is, in the cold assessment of the veteran healer, a catastrophic design mismatch, organic, vulnerable, maintenance-intensive, and guaranteed to fail under conditions that the galaxy produces in unlimited abundance. The flesh is weak, The tech priests have been saying it for 10,000 years, and the Imperium has spent 10,000 years treating that observation as borderline heresy. But the medicae, alone in the tent with the evidence, begins to understand it as simply the truth. This understanding reshapes how the medic thinks about the augmetics and bionics that increasingly feature in their work. A normal person, confronted with the amputation of a limb and its replacement with cold metal and piston, experiences something in the neighborhood of grief. There is a quality of loss to it, the permanent absence of something that was part of the self, replaced by something that functions but does not feel, that works but does not belong. The augmetic is experienced as a diminishment of the human, a surrender of something irreplaceable. The veteran medicae, amputating that limb and fitting that replacement, has a different experience. What they see is a specific biological vulnerability being permanently retired. The leg that was there could get infected, could be shattered, could develop gangrene, could fail in 1,000 organic ways that the medic has personally witnessed. The steel replacement will not. The piston does not feel pain. The metal does not rot. The augmetic is, from the perspective of pure clinical function, an upgrade, a patch that finally addresses a design flaw that should have been corrected at the manufacturing stage. When a healer starts thinking about the human body as something that has design flaws that should have been corrected at the manufacturing stage, the philosophical distance from the ecclesiarchy's teachings has become total. The final casualty of this anatomical obsession is the soul. Not in any metaphysical sense. The medici has long since stopped thinking in metaphysical terms, in the specific, practical sense that the concept of the soul, the idea that beneath the biology there is something sacred and irreducible and worth protecting for its own sake, has been surgically removed from their working model of the patient. The ecclesiarchy preaches that the emperor watches over the eternal soul of every fallen soldier. The medicae has opened thousands of chest cavities. They have held hundreds of hearts in their hands, felt the specific weight and texture of a human heart, watched it stop. And there is nothing behind the ribs that looks like what the preachers describe. There is cardiovascular tissue and pulmonary architecture, and a nervous system that is either still firing or is not. There is biology, there is mechanism, there is a machine that is either running or has stopped running. There is no soul visible from the inside, and the medic has been on the inside too many times for too long to maintain the comfortable belief that it is there anyway. What this produces is a worldview of strict, total materialism that strips the grand narrative of the Imperium's endless war of every quality that was supposed to make it meaningful. The heroes and the cowards bleed exactly the same color. The purity of a soldier's faith provides zero protection against bioacid. The depth of a guardsman's devotion to the Emperor does not affect the trajectory of the round that kills him. The universe, from inside the triage tent, does not care about courage or belief or sacrifice or any of the other qualities that the Imperium has built its entire ideological architecture around. It cares about kinetic energy and tissue damage, about whether the biological machinery is still functional or has been rendered non-functional by the application of sufficient force. The medic is a repairman in a slaughterhouse, trying to keep machines running in a facility specifically designed to destroy machines, working for a management structure that has never seriously considered whether the facility should exist at all. And they know it. They have known it for a long time now. They just have nowhere to put that knowledge except back into the work, because the work never stops, and stopping is not an option the Imperium makes available. Hope is functionally a survival mechanism. In an environment as hostile as an imperial war zone, the ability to imagine a future that is different from the present, to believe that what you are doing today has some connection to a tomorrow that might be worth living in, is one of the primary things that keeps soldiers functional. It is not a luxury or a weakness. It is a cognitive tool, as practical and necessary as any piece of equipment in the field kit. The belief that surviving today's battle might eventually lead somewhere different is part of what makes surviving today's battle feel worth the effort. The veteran medicae understands imperial logistics. And that understanding is the last thing that kills hope, because it makes the mechanism visible. The medic knows, with the specific clarity that comes from being positioned exactly at the intersection of the biological and the institutional, that there is no somewhere different. There is no peaceful retirement, no quiet posting far from the front, no version of the future in which the regiment stops producing casualties and the tent empties out and stays empty. There is only the next campaign, and the next after that, until the individual unit in question is destroyed and replaced by another unit that will produce the same casualties in the same proportions for the same grinding outcome in different reasons. Healing a soldier today guarantees that the same soldier will be back in the tent next month. The medic is not saving lives, they are deferring deaths. The distinction is small, and it is everything. When the severing of that last thread finally happens, when hope finishes dying in the medica's mind, the change it produces is visible to everyone around them, even if no one can articulate exactly what they are seeing. Dying conscript on the table looks up and asks if they are going to be okay. It is the most common question in the tent. Every medic hears it hundreds of times. The novice lies, and lies with conviction, because the lie is a form of care. The last form of care available when the medicine is not enough. The lie says, I see you, you matter, what happens to you matters. The veteran does not lie. They do not say anything. They look at the dying soldier, and what the soldier sees in return is a pair of eyes that are present and functional and completely, permanently empty of anything that reaches back. The void stare, that is what the regiment calls it. The specific quality of flatness in a veteran medicae's eyes that registers even across a crowded mess hall, that makes commissars feel an instinctive unease they cannot justify doctrinally. The discipline of the Imperium runs on threats and promises. The veteran medic has placed themselves entirely beyond the reach of both. You cannot threaten a person who has stopped fearing anything. You cannot inspire a person who has stopped wanting anything. There is nothing left inside them to work with. Here is the dark secret of that void, though, the part that the regiment's mythology around the butcher in white does not acknowledge. The void is not suffering. It is, in its own deeply aberrant way, peaceful. Empathy is a wound that never closes when you are working in an environment that produces an infinite supply of things to be empathetic about. Compassion in the triage tent is not a virtue. It is a vector of destruction that will consume the person who carries it faster and more completely than any enemy weapon. The medicae who arrived full of feeling and full of love for their patients was not stronger than the one who stands here now, empty and efficient. They were more vulnerable. They were carrying something that this environment was always going to destroy, and they were going to be destroyed along with it. The veteran medic did not lose their humanity by accident or through moral failure. They surrendered it deliberately, in pieces, because keeping it was killing them faster than the war was. The rot of mercy is not a collapse, it is an adaptation. It is the mind doing exactly what minds do when placed in impossible environments, finding the configuration that allows function to continue when the original configuration has become untenable. The numbness is the armor, the emptiness is the defense. The void is not the absence of the person, it is what the person became in order to survive. And this is the detail that the Imperium, if it were honest, would have to acknowledge and never will. It needs them this way. A genuinely compassionate healer, still intact, still feeling everything, deployed into a full-scale imperial campaign, they would not last a month before the psychological weight destroyed their capacity to function. The Imperium requires people who can make the triage call without hesitation, who can deliver the Emperor's peace without the execution costing them anything they cannot afford to spend, who can work for 300 hours in a row in the tent and emerge still capable of picking up the scalpel again. It requires the butcher, it requires the void stare, it requires the rot. The broken medicae is not a tragedy that the system failed to prevent. They are a product that the system specifically, if unintentionally, designed. The rot of mercy is not a bug in the imperial war machine. It is a feature. The Imperium does not discharge its broken healers. It promotes them. The veteran medicae, stripped of empathy, hollowed of hope, refined by years of triage into something that functions with the clean, affectless efficiency of a well-maintained piece of surgical equipment, is recognized by the institutional logic of the Adeptus Medicae as exactly what it needs more of. They are given oversight of the triage centers. They are tasked with the training of the novices. The psychological rot that consumed them is handed a curriculum and an audience and told to replicate itself. The mentorship of the veteran over the novice is not gentle. It is not designed to be. The veteran has no interest in protecting the novice's humanity because the veteran's experience has taught them, correctly, given the environment, that humanity is a liability in this work, and that protecting it in a student is doing that student no favors. When the young medic weeps over a lost patient, they do not receive comfort. They receive a cold mathematical correction about time allocation and resource efficiency. When they hesitate before the triage call, they are not given space to process. They are told to decide faster. When their hands shake on the last pistol, they are made to practice until the shaking stops. The veteran is not being cruel. They are being efficient. They are transmitting the only lesson they genuinely believe matters, that the faster the novice stops feeling, the better their chances of survival and function in the environment they have both been placed in. The brutality of the mentorship is an act of care, the same inverted, rot-flavored, absolutely sincere care that defines everything the veteran does. Through this grim lineage, the medicae corps becomes something that was never formally designed and is never officially acknowledged. A cult of nihilism. The white apron, once a symbol that carried the weight of the Hippocratic tradition of the ancient human covenant that some hands would always be dedicated to healing, becomes the uniform of something else entirely. It becomes the identifying mark of a brotherhood defined not by compassion, but by the specific, shared trauma of having had compassion destroyed in them by the same process, in the same place, for the same reasons. The medicae stand apart from the regiment. They are not soldiers, not priests, not officers. They are a separate category of person, defined by what they have witnessed and what that witnessing has taken from them. And the category is invisible from the outside, but absolutely unmistakable from the inside. They do not talk about it. The void does not produce conversation. They simply recognize each other across the tent, in the mess hall, in the brief, lightless hours between shifts, and the recognition is enough. We are the same kind of thing. We know what we know. We have left the same things behind. The physical toll arrives eventually, as it always does. The mind can be numbed, but the body keeps its own accounting. The veteran medicae, who has successfully protected themselves from psychological collapse through the systematic elimination of feeling, has not protected their nervous system from the accumulated stress of decade after decade of the work itself. The hands that are so steady on the scalpel develop a fine, persistent tremor from nerve damage that no medici in the regiment has the time or the inclination to treat. The back that has bent over operating tables for years acquires a permanent curvature. The pallor that sets in, the specific grayish cast of someone who has spent most of their life under harsh artificial light in a tent full of chemical fumes, does not respond to sunlight or fresh air because there is never enough of either to make a difference. The veteran comes to resemble the servitors that work beside them. Same steady automatic motion, same absence of expression, same complete subordination of the self to the function. The difference is only that the servitor did not start as something else. There is no heroic ending available to the combat medicae. They do not die in a glorious charge, defending something worth the sacrifice with their last breath and their name remembered in the regiment's honors. They do not fall protecting a sacred relic or buying time for a retreat that saves 1,000 lives. The ending, when it comes, is entirely consistent with the life that preceded it, functional, anonymous, and quietly tragic in a way that nobody is present to witness. One day, during an unbroken stretch of siege work that has lasted for weeks without meaningful pause, in the middle of a procedure on a patient whose name the medic has already forgotten, the veteran's heart simply stops. Not dramatically, not with a collapse or a cry or any of the conventional signals that a body is failing. It stops the way a machine stops when it has been run past its operational limits for too long without maintenance. A quiet cessation of function. The body falls, someone else picks up the scalpel, the procedure continues, the tent does not pause. There is no eulogy, there is no ceremony. The name goes into a ledger somewhere, and the ledger is filed, and the tent keeps running because the tent always keeps running, because the war always keeps producing what the tent exists to receive, and the absence of one more worn-out component does not change any of that. We are told to revere the healer, to look at the medicae symbol and feel the specific comfort of knowing that somewhere in the chaos there is a force dedicated to pushing back against it, hands committed to mercy in a galaxy that has never shown any. But sit inside the triage tent long enough and the symbol starts to mean something different. Because the question that the medicae's existence forces into the open is one that the Imperium cannot afford to answer honestly. Is it mercy to sew a man together so that the war can tear him apart again? Is the person who does that work, who does it 10,000 times, who trades their capacity for feeling piece by piece until there is nothing left that can be traded, is that person a healer? Or are they something the Imperium invented to fill a gap that compassion alone was never going to be able to fill? The veteran medicae proved that you can save 1,000 lives and lose the thing inside you that made the saving meaningful. That empathy in certain environments is not a strength. It is a resource, finite, depletable, and once exhausted, gone. That the most dangerous vulnerability in the 41st millennium is not physical. It is the capacity to care about what happens to the person on the table, because that capacity, in this context, will destroy you before the enemy gets the chance. The rot of mercy is not a failure. It is the cost of the work, paid in the only currency the work accepts. And the Imperium collects that payment every campaign, from every triage tent, from every healer who arrived intact and left as something else. Secure in the knowledge that the something else is exactly what it needed all along. If the weight of the sterile abyss has settled over you, if you feel the shape of the tent in what we have just walked through, then you already understand something the white apron was never meant to make visible. Strike the subscribe rune before the rot reaches you. Leave your mark in the comments below and send this into the void for the other ghosts who are still looking for someone who will say plainly what the tent actually is. In a galaxy obsessed with survival at all costs, never forget that the most terrifying casualty of war is not the soldier on the table. It is the healer standing over them who stopped feeling the difference a long time ago.
Next,